Hi, my name is Paige. Welcome to my channel. So I asked over on Instagram what video I should film today, if I should film my 2021 stats or if I should film my how much I spent on books in 2021. And you were all entirely unhelpful over at Instagram. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do my stats because I have them all prepared and I have things ready to go for that video. And hopefully my next video can be how much I spent on books. And the number is, it's a little shocking. I'm gonna try and keep this short and sweet. Don't mind my unmade bed and my calendar that definitely still says December. But in 2021, I read 75 books, which amounted to 25,678 pages, and I had an average rating of 4 stars. I need to read these off of my screen over here, but for my star ratings, I had 19 5-star reads, 34 4-star reads, 17 3-star reads, 2 books that I decided not to rate, and then 1 book that I DNF'd. Most of the books that I read physically, but my favorite way to read is reading along to the audiobook. So I'll have it physically in my hands while the audiobook plays. I can speed through books way faster that way. So that was the second most common way that I read. And then ebooks were next and audiobooks were barely there because I cannot pay attention to an audiobook if it's not in front of me. It's just not a way that I like to read. This year I definitely went more adult than I usually do, and I had 58%, almost 59% of my books were adult or new adult. I just kind of grouped those together. And then 33% were YA and a little itty bitty tiny amount were middle grade. So I do need to read a little bit more middle grade. I have a few on my shelves that I really like to read, but I just am leaning towards adult books recently. I am definitely not going to go through all of the numbers of how many books I read in each genre, but you can see that fantasy and romance were my top of this year. I needed a lot of escapism, and those are what I gravitate towards when I need that, and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I'm going to predict that 2022 is going to be very similar because I just crave romance and fantasy right now. So last year I was definitely doing a lot of rereading and I was discovering authors that I really enjoyed, so I was reading a lot of their books as well. But Klune, I read apparently 13 of his books last year, which makes sense. I did put together a guide to Klune, so you can check that out and see which books I love by him and which books I just don't recommend. But Leigh Bardugo, Serena Bowen, Al Kennedy, I was reading so many of their books as well. So I will say that for my next graph, it does not look great. This is my race and ethnicity tracker, and you can see that I was reading a lot of books by white authors, and I do think that a lot of that comes down to how many books I was rereading and how many authors I was just sticking with just their books. So that is something I definitely need to work on next year. I have a lot of books written by authors of color, and I just have not picked them up yet, and I don't really have any good excuse for why I did not. I just put other books before them and I shouldn't have. So I will talk about my goals later in this video, but just know that I'm going to be working on that for sure. This next chart shows the representation that I try and track, or I did last year. And last year I was trying to track if it had LGBTQ+ representation, mental health representation, racial representation, disability, or if there was multiple grouped together, or if there just straight was no representation whatsoever in the book. And as you can see, most of them did have some sort of representation, and I think I definitely gravitate towards books that are LGBTQ+ because that is what group I feel that I am a part of and I want to see represented in books. But I am actively seeking out other books, and I will take any recommendations that you have for ones that have different representation down below. I'm also trying to expand the representation that I'm seeking in books too, and if you have any ideas for what sort of rep I should be looking for, let me know in the comments. And this is the chart for authors, gender, and identity, and I definitely read from more female authors, and I'm very proud of that. Here's the chart that shows how many of my books had own voice representation in them. One of the other things that I like to track is what year the books I'm reading are published in, and it looks like that I read most books that were published in 2020, but the oldest book that I read was published in 1950, which I think was one of the Chronicles of Narnia books that I wrote? I did not write them, I read them. But I just find it kind of interesting to see where I'm reading from the most. So I think in June or so, I put together some 2021 goals that I wanted my stats to look like by the end of the year. I wanted to read 60 books. I wanted to read books with varying representation, so that would be the mental health, racial, disability representation, and I wanted to have 70% of my books have some sort of representation in them. I wanted to read books by trans and non-binary authors, so I wanted that to make up 10% of the books that I read. I wanted 25% of my books to be by diverse authors, and 50% of my books I wanted them to be own voices. I made it on one goal, not quite the others, so I hit 75 books instead of 60. For representation, only 57.5% of my books had any sort of representation in them. Only 2.8% of the books that I read had a trans or non-binary author, so I did not hit my 10% goal with that one. 16.7% of the books that I read were written by authors of color, so I did not meet that goal as well as my final one, which was to read 50% of books that were own voices, and I only hit 42.5%. So I definitely didn't hit them all. I got close on a couple, and some I definitely need to work on. So let's get into my 2022 goals. I'm just gonna throw them all up here so I don't have to do any fancy editing. But in 2022, I would like to read 80 books, and you can watch my journal video to figure out why I picked 80 and not any other number. I would also like to see 30% of the books have some sort of representation in them, as well as 10% of the books be written by a trans, non-binary, or gender fluid author. I want at least 25% of them to be written by authors of color, and I would like 50% or more to be own voices books. So hopefully when I make a stats video at the end of the year or beginning of next year, numbers are going to look much better than they did for my goals last year. Let me know in the comments below how many books you read last year, and be sure to subscribe if you want to see how much money I spent on my books in 2021. You can also guess how much you think I spent. It was a lot. But that is all that I have for this video. I will see you in my next one. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.